I know my question is primarily around neck and shoulder is where I seem to have the most trouble.
Okay.
I can get into specifics. I think what I was looking for just initially is just a better understanding of that relationship. I was looking at a lot of your videos, a lot of your stuff, and it just seems like getting that dorsal rostral expansion is going to be a huge part of flexion, letting cervical rotation happen, and I guess avoiding excessive extension.
Correct. So what I want you to recognize is that the ability to turn your neck in the lower cervical spine is a flexion-based activity depending on which side you're looking at. So if I'm turning my lower cervical spine to the right, that would be actually lower cervical flexion, and that's because of the shape of the lower cervical facet joints. Okay, so they have I can actually draw this out. I got a whiteboard up here, fellas. So let me draw it for you real quick. So, what's the background here on everybody?
It's a white screen now.
Yeah, we're good.
Yeah, I got a whiteboard.
Yeah, it's your screen. Yep.
So hang on, I gotta get the right color here. All right. So if you look at the upper cervical spine, the facets tend to be shaped kind of like that. And if you look at the lower cervical spine, it tends to be shaped like that. And I'm exaggerating for effect, okay? But the point being is that, so the dorsal rostral would be underneath this, okay? And so if this is posterior and this is anterior, dorsal rostral has to expand in that direction for this part of the cervical spine to turn. Okay, so if I'm turning to the left dorsal rostral needs to expand to get the left lower cervical spine to turn to the left, and vice versa. So if you don't get dorsal rostral expansion, don't expect the lower cervical spine to be able to turn. Now, that doesn't mean that people can't turn their head. It just means that how you're going to be producing that turn is not going to be through this lower cervical aspect. And so when you get people that come in with the, they kind of point right to it kind of a thing, or if you get somebody that projects their head forward when they press overhead, this will be somebody that cannot turn the lower cervical spine towards that side. So let's just say I was doing a one-arm kettlebell press, and you see a guy that juts his head forward. You got a guy that probably doesn't have dorsal rostral expansion. You got a guy that can't turn his lower cervical spine to the left, and you got a guy that cannot truly flex the shoulder without a compensatory strategy, which is typically going to be internal rotation of the shoulder overhead. Okay. Did you follow?
I think so. Would that be the same if it's a bilateral movement overhead? I mean, can both sides rotate simultaneously?
So now you're looking at, so what you have is two external rotations that would cancel each other out, which would be traditionally referenced as lower cervical flexion, because the dorsal rostral would expand posteriorly in the direction of expansion, which some may call flexion or kyphosis or whatever. I don't use those terms for that because I just refer to it as expansion because of the way that the spine actually moves. You have segments that are tipping forward, you have segments that are tipping back. So when you call it flexion, it's kind of silly because it's both. Regardless, if you want to get arms overhead without a compensatory strategy, you're going to have to have dorsal rostral expansion. When we're talking about end range flexion, it's especially above T4. Those that have the wide neck, big upper trap kind of a thing, they're probably going to use a compressive strategy in that area, and it will be very difficult for them to create expansion. So if you work with any Olympic lifters that would have to be in an overhead position with a barbell, that's where you're going to see those guys kind of stick their head through the window, so to speak, when they're in that overhead press position. And that's normal because when you have your hands fixed on the barbell and you're pronated, you're never going to be able to capture the external rotation of the shoulder anyway. So under those circumstances, internal rotation would be a normal circumstance, and then the head going forward would be a normal circumstance, just not ideal from the strategy of being able to actually reach overhead.